All right, here we are. I said, it's not quite ESPN 30 for 30, okay, but it's the New York Giants 98 seasons in 98 days. Going to try. I don't know if I'll be able to get it done in 98 days, but we're going to try. So we're on up to forging ahead here. We're up to 1927, right? So I've already covered the first 3 seasons. And obviously 1925 was the first season in the history of the New York Football Giants. Now, the NFL was started in 1920. So basically, the Giants are 5 years behind, shall we say. So year 1 for the Giants, it's year 6 in the history of the NFL. So year 2 is year 7. So this is year 3. Okay, for the New York Giants, 1927. So 25, 26, 27, third year. But it's the 8th season in the history of the National Football League. 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. So the Giants are always just 5 years off. That's all. So, but so far, I mean, the Giants in 1925 and 26 were very respectable. Their first season in the history, they were 8-4-0. Okay, they didn't win a championship either year, but I mean, for the most part, I mean, the first year in existence to be 8-4-0, right? 1926, they were 8-4-1. Okay, so pretty much about the same record. The way it was back then, there were teams coming and going every year. Every year there was a different amount of teams. Now I'm going to go over this in a minute. The first year the Giants were in existence, 1925, there was 20 teams. Okay. 1926, there was 22 teams. But it wasn't like they just added 2 teams. It wasn't like in 1976 how they added the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Seattle Seahawks. Or was it 1995 they added the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Carolina Panthers. No. It was just teams kept coming and going. I mean, because the biggest problem that a lot of the teams had, was obviously money. It's not the way it is today where, there's TV revenue comes in, there's whatever, $1 billion. Everybody gets the same amount. No. It was very, very difficult back then. I mean, obviously they had to pay for everything, but I mean, that included travel, everything. And if, as I'm going to hope I'll remember to go over some of the attendance for some of the games. And there wasn't much there. And not only that, but a lot of attendance, a lot of what they had to do to get people into the stands, they had to give tickets away just to get people to come. So I guess there was the concessions. Maybe there was, people that would sell maybe hot dogs and I don't know, I get beer and whatever, coffee and hot chocolate or something. There were programs back then. They did sell programs because I remember seeing one on eBay. I can't remember if it was 1920, a program from 1925 or 1926 on eBay for New York Giants. So they did sell programs. I think it was 25 cents for a program, which actually for back then, I think that seems like a bit much, but so they did sell stuff like that just to get whatever revenue they can. But I mean, it was so difficult because some teams just didn't have enough money and they had to fold, right? And a lot of it also was like nowadays how, they make the schedule up and boom, they send it. The schedule goes out. Okay, week 1 we're playing here, week 2 we're playing here, week 3 we're blah, 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 right? It wasn't like that back then. Teams played all different amount of games. The first year, I think, in 1925, with the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets played like 17 games. And there was a couple teams played 4 games. And everything in between. The Giants played 12 games. There was other teams that played like 6 games, 9 games, 10 games, right? So there was no set schedule. There was no set amount of games that you played. A lot of the games, I mean, I believe it was last in the 1926 season, it was once or twice the Giants played back to back. That was against the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets. Might have been 1925 and 26. They played back to back, meaning back to back days. meaning they played them on like in Philadelphia, because Frankfurt's in Philadelphia, right? Like maybe on a Saturday. The next day on a Sunday, they're playing them in the Polo Grounds in New York. Talk about a tough schedule. People complain about having to play a Thursday night game, huh? Right? So it was very, very difficult. You know, there was a lot of teams kept coming and going. So this year in 1927, as I'm going to go over here in a minute, they did away with a lot of the teams, a lot of the financially poor teams. Okay, and they were down to 12 teams. They went from 22 teams down to 12. Okay, but 1927 was a very, very special year in history of the New York Football Giants. Why? Because they won their first NFL championship. So let's go here right now. The 1927. Here we go. 1927 NFL season. The 1927 NFL season was the 8th regular season of the National Football League. Prior to this season, the league decided to eliminate, the financially weaker teams. As a result, the league dropped from 22 teams, which they had in 1926, down to 12. Okay. The league absorbed many players and one franchise, the New York Yankees, from the defunct American Football League. What happened was in 1925, after 25 was over, some players and some teams, they created their own league, which was the American Football League, I guess, which was maybe original AFL. Okay, but it only lasted one season. Okay. I said Wilfred Smith in the Chicago Tribune wrote that the reduction formed a more compact circuit and provided better competition. Which is true. I mean, instead of having a 22 teams with a bunch of hodgepodge players on there, a bunch of horrible games, right? It made for better competition, better games. Right after, I'm sure that's probably what wound up happening. Smith said that the outstanding feature of the 1927 NFL season was the debut of Benny Friedman. Who became one of the game's best drawing cards and proved that professional football could support itself in Cleveland. Although 5 black players participated in the 1926 season, including future Hall of Famer Fritz Pollard, none played during the 1927 season, which is an absolute shame. The New York Yankees were added from the American Football League, albeit technically as a continuation of the defunct Brooklyn franchise. Brooklyn had a franchise. The Cleveland Bulldogs returned. Now the Cleveland Bulldogs, interestingly enough, that in 1925, that was the first team that the New York Giants ever beat. The New York Giants in 1925 were 8-4-0. They lost their first 3 games of the season. Matter of fact, the first 3 games they scored a field goal. They scored 1 field goal. They didn't even score a touchdown. They didn't score a touchdown until their 4th game of the season against the Cleveland Bulldogs. They beat them 19-0. They scored 3 touchdowns. But interestingly enough, the Cleveland Bulldogs were a thorn in the New York Football Giants' side in the 1927 season. A little bit more on that in a few minutes here. But the Cleveland Bulldogs returned because they were there in 1925. They were not there in 26, but they came back in 27. And the Buffalo Rangers returned to the Buffalo Bison's name. There was the Buffalo Bisons. For some reason they went to the Buffalo Rangers, and now they're back to the Buffalo Bisons. I mean, right. The Bison suspended operations 5 games into the season. They were all losses, The Rochester Jeffersons remained officially inactive for the 2nd consecutive year, But the Rochester Jeffersons were there in 1925 when the Giants first started playing, It was weird. I mean, some teams, they were there for 1 year, then they were out of the league for a year, then they came back a year later, or maybe they missed a couple years and then they came back. It was just crazy. It says the Axe teams, were the Kansas City Cowboys, the Los Angeles Buccaneers, the Detroit Panthers, the Hartford Blues, the Brooklyn Lions, the Canton Bulldogs, the Milwaukee Badgers, the Akron Indians, the Racine Tornadoes, Columbus Tigers, the Hammond Pros, and the Louisville Colonels. Okay. Those are all the teams that were there in 1926, that were no longer there in 1927 because they're financially strapped, right? So the exercising of the majority of the Ohio teams left the Dayton Triangles as the last surviving connection to the Ohio League. The Dayton Triangles, which served as the basis for the NFL's founding. The Triangles themselves are the only remaining Ohio League member that can arguably be considered a team that remains active to the present city, as the franchise in some form never missed a season and now operates as the Indianapolis Colts. Very interesting. Just 117 miles to the west of their origin. Very, very interesting. The New York Giants were named the NFL champions after finishing the season with the best record. Because remember, from 1920 to 1932, the first 13 seasons, in history of the NFL, the team with the best winning percentage was crowned the champion. Not the team with the most wins. You had to have the best winning percentage. And you were crowned the champion. All right. The Giants' performance was notable, particularly on defense. Oh my goodness. They allowed only 20 points in 13 games, including 10 shutout victories. They gave up they were 11-1-1. In those 13 games, they had 10 shutouts. The other 3 games, they gave up 1 touchdown in 3 games. Right? They gave up 1 touchdown in 3 different games. They gave up 20 points. They gave up obviously 2 touchdowns and 2 extra points, and then one touchdown was scored. Then they missed the extra point. I think that was the Cleveland Bulldog game. I'll go over that in a minute here. But let's see here. We got the Buffalo Bison. Let's see here. The Buffalo Bison, they were in it for this year, 1927, but this was their last season before they went on a hiatus. So they rejoined the league at a later time. So apparently they were not in the league in 1928, but they were to come back at a later time. It's weird. That's like the Pittsburgh Steelers just, we're going to take the next couple of years off. We'll come back though. Which is weird. The Cleveland Bulldogs. They rejoined they rejoined the NFL. They were coached by Roy Andrews. Interestingly enough, Roy Andrews would soon become the head coach of the New York Giants in 1929 and 1930. Interestingly enough. The Duluth Eskimos, this was their last active season. They were coached by Hall of Famer Ernie Nevers. So the Duluth Eskimos, this was their last active season. And then the New York Yankees, they merged from the AFL. They were a team, they merged. So there was the Buffalo Bisons, the Chicago Bears, the Chicago Cardinals, the Cleveland Bulldogs, the Dayton Triangles, the Duluth Eskimos, Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, Green Bay Packers, New York Giants, New York Yankees, the Pottsville Maroons, and the Providence Steamroller. Interesting. So those are the 12 teams. The major rule changes. The goal posts were moved to the end line. They were later moved back to the goal line from 1933 to 73, but since 1974 they remained on the end line. So they moved all the way to the back of the end zone. Interestingly enough, there was a couple games. I can't remember exactly which one it was. One of them might have been against Frankfurt Yellow Jackets or so. A couple of the players were so used to the goal post being on the goal lines, that when they got moved back to the back of the end zone, some of the players thought when they had the ball, they had to run past the goalpost to get into the end zone. Well, they didn't realize that to get to the goalpost, you were in the end zone. Well, it was a couple. I think it was against the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets. I think one of the Giant players caught a pass and he ran into the end zone, but he thought he was still in the field of play, ran past the goalpost to get into he thought to get into the end zone. And apparently, from what I read, there was like 5 Frankfurt Yellow Jacket players that were running after him. And I believe they tackled him out of bounds because he thought he had to get past the goalpost to get into the end zone. He forgot, right? So they were so used to playing with the goalposts on the goal line, but they got moved to the back. Let's see here. Championship race. After 7 weeks, the Chicago Bears were unbeaten at 5-0-1, followed by the once beaten New York Giants 6-1-1, and the Green Bay Packers 5-1-1. 2 games played in New York City on Tuesday, huh? November 8th changed the standings. The New York Yankees handed the Bears a 26-6 defeat, while the Giants beat Providence 25-0. Right? At 7-1-1, the Giants were in first place, while the Bears and Packers were tied for second at 5-1-1. On November 20th, the Bears beat the visiting Packers 14-6, and at 7-1-1 were within striking distance of the 8-1-1 Giants. Now, if the season ended and the Bears were 7-1-1, the Giants were 8-1-1, the Giants would have won because it was the best winning percentage. The teams that didn't necessarily play the same amount of games. Okay, matter of fact, the Giants played 13 games. The Bears played 14 games. The Packers only played 10 games, right? The Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, every year Frankfurt Yellow Jackets were playing a ton of games. The New York Yankees played 16 games. The Frankfurt Yellow Jackets played 18 games. They were 6-9-3, okay? The Buffalo Bisons, as I mentioned, talked about them before. They I guess they folded after 5 games, all losses. They lost by a combined score of 8-123. All right, so, oh my God. Let's see here. On Thanksgiving Day, however, saw the Bears lose at Wrigley Field to their crosstown rivals, the Chicago Cardinals. Chicago Cardinals were 3-7-1. Wow. With 3 games left, the most important game of the regular season took place on November 27th at the Polo Grounds, where 15,000 people turned out to watch the Bears 7-2-1 face the 8-1-1 New York Giants. A Bears win would have tied the teams for first place, but the Giants won 13-7. The New York Giants and the New York Yankees closed their seasons with a 2-game series. At home at the Polo Grounds, the Giants beat the Yankees 14-0 to clinch the title on December 4th, and then beat them again at the old Yankee Stadium on December 11th, a week later, to finish 11-1-1. Very, very interesting. Very interesting. Now, one of the problems the Giants had, okay, is I'll go over their scores, but one of the problems that the Giants had in their first couple seasons, okay, it was scoring points. Their defense. They scored points. Obviously they're 8-4. They had 8-4 and 8-4-1. 25 and 19-26. They were 8-4-1. So they were scoring obviously more points than they were giving up. Their defense was very, very good. But their problem was the games that they lost. They didn't score any points. They were getting shut out. I think in let's say. In 1925, they scored a field goal, I think, in their 4 losses here. If I can, let me see. I got it here? Okay, yeah. Let's say. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Okay, they lost 19-7 to the Bears. Okay. They lost 14-0 to the Providence Steamroller. They lost 14-0 to the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, and they lost 5-3 to the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets. So in their 4 losses, they scored a grand total of 10 points. Okay. It was kind of the same thing in 1926. Okay, 1926. Yeah, the Giants, they scored 27 points. They scored 17, 21, 14, 20. They scored 21 points. They scored 13 points. But when they lost, they got shut out. Okay. All right. They lost 7-0 to the Bears. They lost 6-0 to the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets. This is what I was talking about. Saturday, October 16th in 1926. Saturday, they played Frankfurt Yellow Jackets in Frankfurt, in Philadelphia. Okay. They lost 6-0. The very next day, they played the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets at the Polo Grounds. Once again, they lost 6-0. Okay. They lost to the Los Angeles Buccaneers in 1926, 6-0. Okay. So, I mean, when they, their problem was usually, so if you go to their 8 losses, okay, between 1925 and 1926, they had 8 losses. They were 8-4-0 in 25, 8-4-1 in 1926. In those 8 losses, they scored a grand total of 10 points. Okay, so that was their problem, scoring points. To win a championship. Okay, I mean, obviously they were scoring points. They had a winning record and all and everything. But to win a championship, to be a championship team, their problem was scoring points. All right. So let's say, but I mean, here, the team, the thorn in their side, the first 4 games were kind of a little tough. And for whatever the reason was, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the final 9 games, they pretty much kicked butt. Okay. The first 4 games were rough. And oddly enough, the team that they beat initially, the Cleveland Bulldogs, 19-0 for their initial victory. Their first ever NFL victory was against the Cleveland Bulldogs in 1925. They beat them 19-0. That was the same, and the Cleveland Bulldogs were not in the league in 26. They came back for whatever reason in 1927. That was the team that gave the Giants the problem in 1927, their championship. They were 11-1-1. Well, their one loss was to the Cleveland Bulldogs. Their one tie was to the Cleveland Bulldogs. Giants beat everybody else. Now, if you look, the first game of the season, the Giants won. They beat the Providence Steamroller 8-0. Now, they played, let me see, they played them. Wow. For whatever reason, they played a Providence Steamroller very early. 1925, the Giants' first game ever, first official NFL game. They lost to the Providence Steamroller, okay, week 1. 1926, week 2, they played the Providence Steamroller. 1927, right, week 1, they played the Providence Steamroller. So they played Providence, I guess, like the Dallas Cowboys, like back from, 2012 to 2019, we played them like 6 times in the first week. Well, the Giants seemed to play the Providence Steamroller very early, but they beat the Providence Steamroller 8-0 in week 1. Okay, then on October 2nd, okay, Sunday, they played the Cleveland Bulldogs at Cleveland. They tied them 0-0. Okay, they couldn't score a point. They played the Cleveland Bulldogs 2 times. The Giants were second in the league in scoring points. Right here. Is that it? Nope. In the league in scoring points. Who scored more? Oh, okay. The Cleveland Bulldogs scored more points, the most points. Okay. But the Giants scored 197 points. They played 2 games against the Cleveland Bulldogs and couldn't score a point against them. Couldn't score a point against them in 2 games. Oddly enough. So in week 3, okay, the Giants played the Pottsville Maroons, beat them 19-0. In week 4, okay, the Giants played the Cleveland Bulldogs at the Polo Grounds, and they lost 6-0 to the Cleveland Bulldogs. So the Giants wound up 11-1-1 and won the championship because they had the best winning percentage. Whoops. There we go. Which was 917. Okay, the winning percentage was 917. All right. But after 4 weeks, they were 2-1-1. Okay. Things were not looking too rosy for them, right? 2-1-1. But for whatever reason, they went on a roll and they scored double-digit points in every game from then on to the last 9 games. They scored double-digit points and they only gave up 2 touchdowns in his final 9 games. Okay. Now here, same thing with the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets. On Saturday, October 22nd, they played in Philadelphia against the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets on Saturday. They beat them 13-0. The very next day, on Sunday, October 23rd, they played the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets at the Polo Grounds. They beat them 27-0. Okay. Then let's see. The day before Halloween on October 30th, they beat the Pottsville Maroons at the Polo Grounds 16-0. The next week on Sunday, November 6th, they beat the Duluth Eskimos 21-0 at the Polo Grounds. 2 days later, on Tuesday, Tuesday, okay, they played at home against the Providence Steamroller. Once again, beat them 25-0 this time to put their record to 7-1-1. Okay, then they played the Chicago Cardinals on November 20. So it looks like they had 12 days off. All right. And they played on Sunday, November 20th. They beat the Chicago Cardinals at the Polo Grounds 28-7. All right. So that's one of the touchdowns. The other touchdowns the Giants gave up. Then the following week on Sunday, November 27th, against the Chicago Bears. Okay. The Giants beat them, wound up 13-7. Okay. And pushed their record to 9-1-1, and obviously, they had 2 more games to go, but that victory against the Bears was huge. Okay, the Giants were winning 13-0. The Bears scored a touchdown, okay, in the fourth quarter to make it 13-7. But the Giants would prevail. So the Giants had 2 games left, both home and home against the New York Yankees. Okay, December 4th. Okay, at home at the Polo Grounds, they beat the Yankees 14-0, pushed their record to 10-1-1. In the final game of the season at the old Yankee Stadium, the New York Giants at Yankee Stadium played the New York Yankees, okay, and they beat them it was on December 11th, they beat them 13-0, okay? So if you look, the Giants, I forgot what did they score? The Giants scored 28 touchdowns the whole season. Okay, they gave up 3 touchdowns. 3 touchdowns the whole season. Okay, they didn't give up a point in the first half of any game. Did not give up a point in the first half. They gave up 2 touchdowns in the third quarter and 1 touchdown in the fourth. So the first half of every game, the Giants did not give up a point. They gave up 20 points all season long. They played 13 games. They gave up 1.5 points per game. Not bad. Not too shabby. Okay, I would have to say even Lawrence Taylor would be proud. 1.5 points per game is pretty impressive. I said the Giants scored 28 touchdowns. All right. Now, in I believe it was, if I remember correctly, 1925. Okay, yeah, they have a lot of players on a team. Okay, 1925. Okay, the Giants had 29 players. Okay, the whole season. Now, some of the players only played a game. Some played 2 or 3. Right. I believe, if I remember correctly, in 1926, I think they had 27 players play on a team for the whole season. Well, 1927 got even leaner. They had 26 players play for their team the whole season long. 26 players. They played 13 games and they did it with 26 players. Simply amazing. Now, if we look, okay, well, was it with this year too? I think, this year they had 3 guys on their roster who wound up coaching the Giants. Now, Doc Alexander coached them in 1926. He coached them. Bob Folwell, okay, coached the Giants in 1925. Doc Alexander coached the Giants in 1926. 1927 and 1928, Earl Pottinger, okay, coached the Giants. So Earl Pottinger, I think that's how you pronounce his name, was the first coach in the Giants' history to win a championship, 1927. So he coached them for 2 seasons, 1927 and 1928. But the Giants on their roster in 1927 had 3 coaches, okay? And then their other coach was Steve Owen. Okay, he coached the Giants from 1931 to 1953. He's the all-time leader, Giants leader in wins with 153. He was 153. He lost 100 games, and I can't remember. He had like 9 ties or 12 ties or something like that. But he's the leader, the all-time leader as far as victories for coaches for the New York Football Giants. But in 1927, the Giants had 26 players play for him, and 3 of them at one point in time actually coached the Giants. Now, just to kind of go to show you here, okay, the Giants' age of those 26 players, they were 27 and a half years old, okay? Their average weight was 203 pounds, okay? Right, which is, yeah, it's not like that nowadays. Their average height was 5'11", 5 foot by 5 foot and 11 and a half inches, almost 6 foot tall was their average height, okay? But the average experience, okay, which is just goes to show you, I mean, the players did not last very long back then, okay? If you played 5 or 6, 7 years, that was a long time, okay? Due to the injuries and everything, right? The average age of the players was 2.8. Their years, their experience was 2.8 years. Okay, that's what the whole roster average was, 2.8 years. The Giants had Joe Guyon, who was there for 7 years at the time. Al Nesser was there for 7 years. Earl Pottinger was there for 7 years, but a lot of the other guys had like 1 year of experience. So, I mean, guys didn't have a lot of experience either. And as I said, a lot of guys that wound up, playing for any length of time, you got to consider yourself pretty lucky, because the guys just did not play very long. Did not play very long at all. But the New York Giants in 1927, okay, the victory with 11-1-1 and winning percentage of .917. The Green Bay Packers were in second place. Their winning percentage was .778. They were 7-2-1. Okay, but the Giants scored 197 points. They were second in the league. Cleveland Bulldogs scored 209 points. So the Giants, but their offense really, really gelled very well. But they only gave up 20 points. The best defense in the history of the New York Football Giants. Not so much because the game was different back then. I mean, I'll take Lawrence Taylor any day of the week. But if you go back to 1927, the New York Giants gave up 20 points in 13 games. They gave up 3 touchdowns all year long. They didn't give up 1 point in the first half. 3 touchdowns. They averaged giving up 1.5 points per game. Pretty impressive. And not only that, but they won their first NFL championship. Well, that does it for 1927. I'll be back again tomorrow night to cover the 1928 season from the New York Giants, which just happened to be the 4th season in the history of the New York Football Giants. I'll see you then.